Okay. We should talk a little bit about Thomas Jefferson. I asked you to read two pieces by Thomas Jefferson. So, um, the Declaration of Independence and his notes on the state of Virginia, an excerpt from that. It seems to me that the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence was, in some ways, a very different man from the one who writes his notes on the state of Virginia. So let's start with the famous Declaration. This document is full of the language of Thomas Paine, especially when he lists the numerous offenses of the king against the people of the English colonies. He prefaces his list with a claim that the decision has already been made and that the people of the colonies have agreed with this separation from England. He then explains that this separation is necessary because the king has violated the rights of the colonists. These rights are not at first legal rights, but human rights. Jefferson makes the claim that all people, because they are human, have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, the first two sound reasonable. People should expect the right to live. That makes sense, and everyone can agree with that. Liberty. This one's a little fuzzy. What exactly is liberty? The liberty to move from place to place, the liberty to raise a family, the liberty to shoot guns out your back window. This word liberty means different things to different people. And maybe that's why it works so well. It's a word that everyone can respond to. It evokes our heartfelt agreement. But the pursuit of happiness? Really? I mean, all people have the right to pursue happiness. Honestly, I'm not really sure that that's a human right. Maybe people with lots of money and easy circumstances can pursue happiness, but there are a lot of people who struggle to pay the bills. This one seems like a grand ideal. There are no people on earth other than Americans who believe that they have a right to happiness or to pursue happiness. And maybe that's a part of Jefferson's privilege. As a wealthy farmer with a large plantation and slaves, he did pursue his happiness every day. He played his violin every day. He patented inventions, and he was a scholar and a statesman. So in that time period, and for some people, maybe the idea of pursuing happiness made perfect sense. To us today, though, it seems a little odd to make that claim. It is one of those grand ideals that comes out of the thinking of the founding fathers. But to some of us, it seems more like the privilege of the few. We get a real sense of Jefferson's privilege when he writes his notes on the state of Virginia. So here Jefferson is responding to questions written to him by a curious Frenchman who wanted to know how the new government of the United States works. And so Jefferson describes to him how the government works in his own state of Virginia. His account begins simply by discussing how the common law of England was adopted as the common law of the United States, with a few notable changes that he lists. One of the changes relates to a proposal to send the American slaves to Africa to establish their own country. The state of Virginia and the United States did not follow through with this plan. So on the one hand, Jefferson seems quite liberal in wanting to free the slaves. On the other hand, his description of his African slaves seems mean-spirited. His desire to send his slaves to Africa really seems to be a way of getting rid of a problem. He clearly has no regard for Black slaves. Now, keep in mind that this is a man who kept one of his slaves as a mistress and that he had a number of children with her. The main reason he says that slaves should leave the country is that there is anger on both sides of the race issue. White folks would hate their freed slaves, and the slaves would harbor resentment against their owners. And if the slaves were freed and left in the country, the result, Jefferson says, would be a race war that would end both races. Then, after that cheerful assessment, he begins with his list of defects. Defects of Black people. Black people, he says, have black skin. Duh. And it's not as beautiful as white skin, he says, because white skin can be expressive in showing emotions. In fact, black skin is rather ugly, Jefferson says, because black folks show no emotion. Black folks also lack beauty in the forms of their bodies. White people have beautiful forms in their parts. And let's not forget the beautiful flowing hair of the white people. Black slaves just cannot compete with all this white beauty. Black people, Jefferson says, smell bad. They sweat a lot, and they are more tolerant of the heat than white folks, but their sweat gives them a really bad odor. Black folks, Jefferson says, are foolish. After a hard day's work, they will find some form of entertainment rather than get a good night's sleep. They have no common sense, he says. They don't have solid emotions like white people. If they are sad, they're sad for the moment. If they express love for a mate, that love has more lust than sentiment in it. Then black people don't need much sleep. For some reason, he makes the claim that black folks only need a few hours sleep. And then he compares African Americans clearly here to animals. This is one of the few places where Jefferson compares his slaves directly to different types of animals that have comparable qualities. So Jefferson goes on explaining how stupid and smelly and childish his black slaves are. All the while, when he's writing this, he is sitting in his wood-paneled office in his easy chair in his beautiful plantation home, while his slaves are in the fields or on the grounds working. And he has the privilege of sitting in judgment of these people who work the plantation for him and harvest the crops that keep him in idle luxury. In this account, in the notes on the state of Virginia, there is little rhetoric. There is only Jefferson explaining what he truly believes to be true. And if the Jefferson of the Declaration of Independence is an idealist who advocates universal human rights, the Jefferson of the Notes is a hypocrite who can't see the extent of his own white privilege. This duality marks the beginning of our nation. George Washington had slaves too, and he took them with him to Philadelphia when he was president, even though it was against Pennsylvania law. Slavery was just something that the Southerners believed in, even though they knew in their hearts it was inhumane. But they somehow convinced themselves to believe that it was also the best thing for everyone, somehow. So Jefferson was more representative of the country than otherwise. While the nation wrote down and believed in the highest of ideals, its most powerful men conducted themselves about as sweetly as those Christians that De las Casas talked about. So when you write your responses on Jefferson, you might want to discuss how the same man wrote both pieces and how that obvious hypocrisy, all men created equal, made sense to him.